Hey Wolfpack. First off, I'd like to thank you all for 11,000 subscribers. It makes me so happy to see more people become a part of the Wolfpack. And also, I'm trying to get the Spotify up. I have been very busy lately, but it will be up soon, I promise. And since it is fall still, it is a wonderful time to start camping with a nice cool breeze, out in the middle of the woods perhaps, and even maybe some strange noises that you hear while you're sitting around the campfire. With that said, gather around the campfire and let my voice soothe your nightmares. We'd been talking about it for weeks. Camping. Well, my daughter had, I should say. Personally, I was kind of on the fence. I'm not really an outdoorsy kind of guy, to put it mildly. If you'd asked if I'd ever pitched a tent, I'd probably just slap my thigh and giggle uncontrollably. Moving into a new house is a strenuous task in and of itself. But add starting a new job, a new life into the mix, and you end up with one adult who doesn't know how to calm down, relax, or spend time with his daughter. So, that's where the camping idea originated. I promised her we'd go once we'd settled in, and she made damn sure to hold me to it, reminding me of it at least 5 times daily. Melissa was a hurricane, always up to something. Some would call her a handful, but that would be nothing short of a gross understatement. But she was also very sweet, dedicated, focused, and extremely imaginative. That's why it was so easy to sometimes forget I was the adult. She would mostly just take care of and entertain herself. But camping definitely required at least one adult. That's what I read somewhere anyways. And I was planning to go through with it, I swear. But alas, I couldn't control the weather. It started already Thursday afternoon, pouring rain and strong winds. We were planning on heading out Saturday morning, but when we woke up, it had gotten even worse. Now, I'm no weatherman, but the weatherman on the local news is. Thus, I was inclined to believe him when he claimed we were dealing with a storm. Melissa was devastated, of course. She'd been really looking forward to it, picking out possible locations for our campsite, reading up on the flora and fauna of the area, learning what animals we might encounter. When I told her there was no way we could go camping in a storm, she broke down crying. I don't think she was mad at me, but it still broke my heart. So that's when I proposed we could set up camp right here in our living room. At first, she found the idea stupid. How could that be any fun? No animals, no fishing, no searching for remedial herbs, no nothing. But she slowly came around to the idea. We could turn off all the lights, sleep in the tent, read scary stories, pig out on junk food. We could pretend we were lost campers in a storm, and that something terrible lurked just outside our tent. So, we pitched the tent, right there between the couch and the TV, laid out the sleeping bags, and emptied the cabinets and cupboards for all things sweet, killed the lights, and crawled into our cozy little campsite universe. She brought her favorite book, Little Pumpkin and Cold Bones by Man and Lysette. While I was quite looking forward to reading this weird book I'd found hidden under a loose floorboard in the attic, The Electric Boner by some guy named Nathaniel Lewis. The pages were oddly sticky, but what can you do? We snuggled up in our sleeping bags and had a great time, listening to the creepy creaking of the old house, the ghostly banshee-like sounds of the wind, eating snacks, and telling each other scary stories. Hers scared the hell out of me, let me tell you. She read to me from her book, and I read to her from my book. It wasn't a good idea, but it was just wonderful. She fell asleep pretty late, face down in her book, and I guess I followed soon after. I think it was the cold that woke me up. The first thing I remember anyway was freezing cold. Way below zero, crippling cold. I was shivering and chopping my teeth uncontrollably. The sleeping bag barely warm enough to keep me from going hypothermic. What the hell was going on? It was dark. Way too dark. Sure, we switched off almost all of the lights, but I was sure I left at least a few of them on. Had the power gone out? Given the intensity of the storm, it was entirely possible. but it still didn't explain the cold. I sat up clumsily, still constrained by the rather tight-fitting sleeping bag. There was something off, something I couldn't explain. "Melissa," I whispered. No answer. "Melissa," I said slightly louder. "Are you there? Wake up!" I got my arm free and blindly felt around the tent. Nothing. Not even her sleeping bag. Maybe she was uncomfortable and couldn't sleep, and decided to go to her bed. Maybe she just had to use the toilet, and took the sleeping bag with her for warmth. I guess both made sense, but I still couldn't shake that strange feeling, the feeling that told me I wasn't in my house anymore. I fumbled to find the zipper. My fingers were completely numb from the cold, and I had to pause every once in a while to breathe some warmth back into them. When I finally found it, without thinking, I just yanked it open, not considering what I might face on the other side. Snow. No wonder it was so dark. The tent was completely covered in snow. I managed to crawl out awkwardly, a growing sense of dread slowly revealing itself as I realized just how far from the house I had to be. I stumbled to my feet, looking around at my newfound location dumbfoundedly. It was amazing, unreal, and fricking terrifying. It was dark, but not too dark. Dusky or dim, I guess. But the full moon and the clear sky above illuminated just about everything. I was standing in what appeared to be a deep ravine, the steep, jagged rock walls stretching impossibly into the air on either side. The ground was covered in about 2 feet of snow, and I could see the slope curving even deeper ahead. But what really caught my eye, the thing that instantly set adrenaline pumping through my system, was the footprints in the snow. They were leading further down the slope, 2 distinct sets of footprints. One were boot prints, obviously adult, and a male, probably judging by the size. The other, the naked footprints of a child. Melissa. It had to be her. Without thinking, I immediately sprung to action and halfway stumbled through the snow, calling out her name in shrieks of utter panic. "Melissa! Melissa!" The only thing I could hear was my own echoing voice. I kept going, the cold not bothering me as much, probably because of the previously mentioned adrenaline, but I knew, deep down, I wouldn't last long in these temperatures. I followed the footprints for about 5 minutes when I spotted the blood. Just tiny droplets in the snow to begin with, but growing in both size and frequency the further I went. She was hurt. The sick person that was chasing her had hurt her. I felt kind of a mixture between horror and fear and rage that completely possessed me, and driven by this terrible emotion I set aside all pain and exhaustion, running at speeds I've yet to match, and then I found them. It was some sort of circular chamber, the end of the slope. The moonlight hit them just right, and it felt like I was watching everything unfold in some crazy hallucination. She didn't wear any clothes. She was completely naked, and her pale skin almost appeared blue. She had her back turned to me, her flowing hair reaching down to her waist. "Melissa!" I yelled. The girl turned around slowly. She was bathed in blood, head to foot, and in her cold blue eyes, I saw something disturbingly primal, something dark and animalistic, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. That wasn't Melissa. She sniffed the air, like she was trying to ascertain if I was a threat or not, before bending down to the mangled corpse before her. What happened next, I still have problems describing. It was like watching a clan of hyenas rip their prey to pieces, except in this case, the hyenas was just a tiny, fair-haired girl. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. I think maybe I was afraid she'd react to any sudden movement, afraid she'd chase me down and kill me like she did that man. After about 10 minutes of watching her completely shred the corpse to tiny chunks, she took a long, deep breath of freezing cold air and turned back to face me.
"Have you seen Miss Piggy?"
she asked.
"The bad man scared her."
The voice was just so normal. Exactly what you'd expect from a little girl, but it still struck fear in my heart. Terrible, agonizing dread. No, I mumbled. "No, I haven't seen Miss Piggy." She stared at me for quite a while. her thin arms sort of waving hypnotically at her side. Every once in a while, she broke out snarling, like an agitated dog, almost as if she wasn't fond of her own thoughts.
You better go then.
She said eventually.
Go back home.
I stood there, shivering, suddenly realizing again just how cold it really was. The girl didn't seem to mind the sub-zero temperature at all. She just kept pacing around what was left of the corpse, occasionally erupting in wild, bestial snarls.
Go!
She suddenly shrieked.
Go before I change my mind.
I turned on the dime and ran back the way I came. I didn't stop, didn't even slow down to catch brief glances behind me. I just knew that I had to do what she said. If I didn't, she'd slaughter me without breaking a sweat. I arrived at the tent wheezing, completely famished, exhausted, dehydrated, and dangerously hypothermic, all mixed into one big bag of things that could kill me. What now? Was all I could think. What on earth should I do now? It was only when I heard the rapidly increasing sound of naked feet in the snow that I dove back into the tent, feverishly closing the zipper behind me. I don't know how long I stayed in there. Hours, days, probably not days. But at some point, I lost consciousness, fainted, and everything turned black. I woke up in my living room. Well, in a tent erected in my living room at the very least. This is the part you loathe, the part some of you were expecting, the part where I tell you it was all a dream. Well, that's what I tried to tell myself anyway. Just some freakishly vivid dream. So vivid, in fact, that I woke up with frostbite on my hands and feet. Melissa was sound asleep next to me, and I thanked all the gods I could remember the name of. At least she didn't get dragged into this terrifying nightmare. As I sat there tending to my wounds, she slowly came to, and sat up next to me. She gave me a long hug. You alright, kiddo? I asked.
Yeah, Daddy, I just wanted to thank you.
Thank me for what? I said, slightly perplexed.
For the camping trip, of course. It was wonderful.
I smiled. It had been pretty great. Well, except for that very vivid nightmare. But I was alive, and my daughter was happy. What more can a man ask for?
Guess what?
She said playfully. What? I smiled.
I got to ride her.
She smiled gleefully. Who? I asked, truly puzzled. Miss Piggy, of course.
Miss Piggy, of course. The girl thanked me for finding her, and she let me ride her.
I'm never going camping in my living room again. I am a huge nature lover. I love camping, fishing, and riding my dirt bike in the woods. I live in the middle of nowhere with woods surrounding me everywhere. So, I am experienced. I went to the Sonian forest in Belgium, as I like to go on trips into the forest to relax, to take my mind off my stressful life. The Sonian forest is a 10,920-acre forest at the southeast edge of Brussels in Belgium. I went away from many pathways and used a compass to guide me. After a tiring hike, I finally found a place that looked sufficient for me to set up my tent. I took my Nikon camera with me to take some photographs of the nature and perhaps even some wildlife. I was disappointed to see barely any wildlife though the nature itself satisfied me enough. I had a duffel bag for a tent and a big backpack full of basic supplies such as water, canned food, some snacks, a powerful lighter, and a sleeping bag. Most of the day was pretty uneventful. I did not see any people or significant wildlife. The sun began to set, and I got to view a very pleasant sight. The forest looked truly gorgeous with a faint light of the sun shining on the trees. Fast forward another 2 hours, and I got a strange feeling in my gut. But I brushed it off as me being paranoid over absolutely nothing, and I fell asleep a few minutes later. When I woke up, it was totally dark. I wasn't completely blind due to the moon providing me minimal light, which made seeing a tad bit easier. When I awoke, I smelled the most awful scent I've ever smelled. It smelled like there were a dozen rotting carcasses laying everywhere. When I peeped my head out of my tent, I didn't see anything dead. I thought this was pretty weird, as to the fact that I didn't see any big animals the previous day. and it takes more than a few hours for a dead animal to start rotting and smelling like hell. I heard a faint cry in the distance. It sounded distorted and deep. The best description I can give it is a cow trying to howl like a wolf. I heard the noise echoing over the entire forest. The second time it sounded way closer. I started packing up because I was getting paranoid since no normal animal could have gotten that close in such little time. I heard the rustling of leaves. Since this was only recently in fall, the ground was covered in leaves from the trees. The footsteps, sounding inconsistent, encircled me. I looked at my compass, scanned the surrounding area of me one more time. It was almost pitch black. I couldn't see past a few meters in front of me. I walked back in the south direction since I first walked north. I heard the rustling of leaves again behind me. My regular walking turned more into a jog so I could get to the safety of my car. I heard the same howl again, and this time it was very close. It sounded like it was right next to me, but I was blind in this forest. In a split second, I made the radical decision and dropped both my tent and the duffel bag and my backpack and made a sprint for it in the direction of my car. The rustling of leaves followed me throughout the forest. I saw the opening of the forest and felt so relieved when I saw my car parked there. The rustling of the leaves abruptly stopped at the end of it. I now stood on the road looking at the forest, which was in dead silence. There was no sound coming from there whatsoever. As soon as I got out of that forest did my gut feeling stop. I heard the howl very close again. It spooked me enough to get into my car in an instant and get the hell out of Dodge as soon as possible. I grabbed a hotel in Brussels and drove back home the next day. This is still a pretty fresh occurrence and only happened recently to me. Why, how, and what happened in that forest? Michael, James, and I had been friends since elementary school. We'd always find time to hang out, despite the increasingly busy schedule and discovery of the opposite sex. We had been particularly busy with work lately and hung out less often, so Michael suggested we go camping over the weekend. James and I agreed without even giving it a second thought. We loved camping, and this was a good opportunity to get drunk together again without interpretations. I picked them up on a Friday afternoon, and when I asked Michael where we were going to camp, he said that it was the same place his granddad used to camp in and that it was highly secluded, meaning no one would be bothering us. Took us a few hours to get there, but when we did, we took our stuff and followed Michael deeper into the woods. We walked for about an hour, and it had started to get dark. James and I were a little agitated having to walk for so long to Michael's special spot. But just as we were about to tell him that this was a good spot as any, he told us we were here. It was a big clearing, giving us a lot of visibility and room to set up our tents. After unpacking, we cooked some food and drank beer, reminiscing of the old days and exchanging news. James talked about how he wanted to become a police officer, and we ridiculed him a little bit for kicks. But after we've had our laughs, telling him he'll need to arrest himself first for everything he's done in the past, we expressed our support for him. Michael shrugged, not knowing what he wanted in life. Right now, he was happy with a 9-to-5 job and just didn't care about anything more than stability. They were about to ask me about my plans when we heard a high-pitched scream echo in the distance. We instinctively turned our heads in that direction of the sound, but we saw nothing. I asked Michael, who was a more experienced camper than I was, but he said he wasn't sure. We brainstormed what kind of animal it could be, but after a while, we let it go. We continued talking for a while around the campfire, getting ready to call it a day. Just then, I saw movement in the trees with my peripheral vision. I thought it must have just been my imagination, because when I turned my head, there I saw only rows of trees. I shrugged it off and continued to listen to James's story. Both he and Michael seemed to not notice anything. A few minutes went by and I had a nagging feeling, something I couldn't just shake away. I looked at the row of trees to my right again, and still, nothing. Still, looking there made me feel uneasy. I decided to ignore my gut, dismissing it as my own paranoia. Not even 5 minutes go by, and the feeling of dread only intensified. I looked to my right again and stopped in bafflement. A few feet in front of the row of trees stood a lone, very thin tree, separated from the rest in the clearing. I squinted my eyes, trying to figure if my brain was playing tricks on me from excessive beer consumption. Was that tree there all along? Wait, that's not a tree. It just moved slightly. I blinked and continued staring, transfixed on whatever stood there. The longer I stared, the more apparent it became that it was no tree I was looking at. It was someone, or rather something. Something too thin to be a human and too tall to be an animal. I grabbed Michael's attention, and when he looked at the figure, he went pale instantly. He silently muttered, "Oh crap," to himself. "Don't look at it," he said. "Guys, listen to me. Do not look at it. If it comes near us, don't acknowledge it. Don't talk to it. Just keep your eyes on each other. Got it?" To say I was scared shitless is an understatement. "Michael, what the hell is that?" I asked. "Quiet. Just look at me and don't move your eyes away, alright?" he said with a trembling voice. I looked over to James, who was silently staring at the campfire. Everything was quiet. In fact, it was too quiet, and I only realized it just now. No sounds came at all, save for the crackling of the fire. We stared like that in silence for what felt like ages, when suddenly, another sound appeared in the distance. A branch cracked, as if someone had stepped on it. From there, we heard the thuds of very slow footsteps, followed by the rustling of leaves on the ground, coming from my right side. In seconds, I saw something emerge in the corner of my eye, but I couldn't make out what it was. Michael motioned with his index finger for us to look at him, and so we did. The figure slowly stepped behind Michael, and I could see with my limited line of sight that the creature was extremely thin, not even fit for the word emaciated. It looked like a real-life stick figure. It was tall, easily towering over Michael, and probably even more than I anticipated. But I wouldn't dare look up. It looked like its body had been made from roots and branches. Slowly, the creature bent down with a creaking noise and put its head next to Michael's. I felt its penetrating gaze on me, but I stared right into Michael's eyes, who was tearing up by this point. I could see the creature smiling with my peripheral vision, and it was almost irresistible to glance at the creature just for a second, but I managed not to do it. The figure stood up, creaking equally, and stayed behind Michael for a few seconds, completely still, before it turned around and went the other way. It was coming in my direction, and I felt like I was about to piss my pants. It came close behind me, and I heard its footsteps stop. Then, the creaking sound followed, and I knew it was bending down. I closed my eyes and breathed out quietly, trembling like a leaf in the wind, and then, all of a sudden, I heard a frantic set of footsteps to my left. I opened my eyes and glanced to the left, seeing James run away. There was a high-pitched scream behind me, and then the creature ran after James, its footsteps impossibly quick. "On me!" Michael reminded me during the commotion. I looked back at him and listened as the creature caught up to James, who managed to let out a short scream before he was silenced. What ensued was the sound of loud screeching, bashing, slamming, and mauling, while Michael and I stared at each other. It lasted for a whole minute before it abated, and the blood-curdling screams stopped completely. Silence once again filled the air around us, and I heard the slow and soft footsteps to my left. They gradually faded and then completely disappeared. Michael and I continued glaring at each other, too paralyzed with fear to avert our gaze. Only when we started to hear the wildlife in the forest again, Michael suggested we get the hell out of there. He told me not to look to my left, not because I might see James's body, but because he didn't want to risk the creature still being around. We left all of our crap in the camp, and bolted out of there. The creature left in the opposite direction, so we hoped we wouldn't run into it, but we didn't care about ignoring it at this point. We heard a loud shriek in the distance, which indicated the monster was far away from us, which put us at ease momentarily. Still though, that scream was enough to freeze the marrow of my bone. We reached the car much faster than we got to the campsite, and once we got in, I clumsily pulled out my keys, almost dropping them on the floor while trying to put them in the ignition. We drove out of there with a cloud of dust behind us, both of us shaking. "Michael, what the hell was that thing?" I asked, while going as fast as the road allowed me to. I don't know," he muttered, still pale. "My grandfather told me about it a few times. I thought those were just stories. He said that the creature can only hurt you if you let it know you see it. Poor James, I said, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting that thing to appear in the reflection. Luckily, it never did, and Michael and I made it out safely. We went straight to the police and reported the whole thing. To their skepticism, and I can't blame them, a couple of drunk guys barge in the middle of the night, telling them about a fricking stick figure that killed their friend in the woods. After some convincing, they decided to send a patrol to the spot. An investigation was started when the police quickly found James's body. They said he had been mauled so badly that they couldn't identify him. They concluded it was a bear attack, dismissing our story of the stick figure, threatening that we weren't suspects right now, but that it could very well change very quickly. So Michael and I dropped it. I don't go camping anymore, and if you do, make sure you know where you're going, or else you might end up like James, or worse. Thanks for watching, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your story, my email and subreddit will be in the description below. And also, if you're not subscribed, please do if you want. And don't forget to like and comment as well. Have beautiful nightmares. And I will see you next time.